work outside the law, this would lead to lawlessness and thereby destabilize our country. We are meeting here to call on all South African people to respect the judgment of the Constitutional Court, as we have said before. We are here to say no to any forms of lawlessness and acts that will threaten the stability of the country. In this regard, we must declare that we, as the people of South Africa, will not allow anyone to destabilize this country or act outside the constitution of the country. We need to restate again that even if everything failed, the people of South Africa will be the last line of defense. Secondly, we meet here, and I would like to clarify this, not to celebrate anybody who's going to jail. This is a tragedy and could have been avoided by complying with the Constitutional Court to appear at the State Capture Commission. We need to advise those who are intending to or are already engaged in acts of lawlessness that they also will end up in jail and they should avoid it. We call on them to cease such activities or thoughts. Our message to them is that we do not want to see you in jail. Our Constitution gives them the right to choose to support the former president, as well as express protest against him going to jail. But the same Constitution also expects them to do the same and to do it within the law, and they cannot work outside the Constitution. Lastly, we are here to support our judiciary as an independent arm of the state. In fact, we support all arms of the state to ensure that our constitutional democracy is protected. This will enable us to start afresh to deal with all the political, social, and economic challenges that are facing this country, including corruption that is robbing our people of the resources that should change the quality of their lives. We're looking forward to listening to all the speakers during this rally. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Chikane. Without much ado, I'm going to ask that we prepare and put on a recorded message from our former public protector, Thuli Madonsela. And as I do so, I also want to recognize the 50 plus organizations who've submitted their commitment and support to this initiative. And we look forward to hearing what Advocate Madonsela will be telling us. Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleague, and thank you to Defend Democracy as a collective. Firstly, for the privilege to join you today, and secondly, for making this platform available for us to defend, support, and anchor democracy and the rule of law. Dear colleagues, who among us would not like to live a life where they could do as they please? Go wherever you want, whenever you want to. We would like to live in a society where everyone gives you the right to do whatever you want and trust that everything that you're doing comes from a place of good intentions. We would like to live in a society where you could drive any side of the road and just generally be free. I suspect all of us would like to live in that kind of society. And I suspect we would call it freedom. But think very carefully, would we be free? If me and you could do as we want, if a court of law asks us to come in, we come when we want, and we don't go if we didn't want to.
All right, now let's interrupt that rally and go to Mkandla, where our reporter Samkele Maseko is standing by. As you know, hundreds or dozens of the former president's supporters are
I am very, very excited to see women, especially Black women, who are no longer shy to express themselves, to be angry, to be outraged at the way in which the judges are being treated, at the way in which the courts of this country are treated. It is not to be irrational. In fact, in many ways, it is the most important and the most relevant response to what is happening. Finally, I want to ask President Zuma to do what he has said for more than 13 years that he will do. This country, Mr. President, has been very kind and very generous to you. The post-apartheid South Africa has been very generous and very patient with President Zuma. He has been elected at the highest office in this country, where executive authority has been vested in him as a president. Before that, he was number 2 of this country. Before that, he was the MEC. And yet, Mr. President continues to project himself as the most disempowered person in this country. So I think it's important that we ask him to stand up and to take responsibility for what he has done, and to take responsibility that he has asked other people to do so. When he inaugurated the Commission on State Capture, he asked all South Africans to abide by the Commission's requirements, to go and answer when they were asked, and to cooperate with the state capture. It cannot be that all these rules apply to other people, but not to President Zuma. Finally, we ask you to provide leadership and integrity, and ask people who are out in protest in your name, we ask you to say, not in my name, and to show leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Shabonga. Without much ado, the next speaker will be Andrew Gasno from giving a youth response to it, and especially after your presentation about accountability and taking responsibility. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks very much. Afternoon, everyone. I think where we find ourselves today...
And Andrew, I'm going to keep you to 5 minutes, please.
That's fine. That's fine. I'll adhere to that. Thank you. I think where we find ourselves is in a precarious position. We see ourselves having reaffirmed our values in the Constitution, thanks to the Constitutional Court, but in a country that is wrestling with fundamental issues, a country where more than 60% of our country is under the age of 30, many of them suffering, many of them weighed down by the cost of corruption, by the cost of malfeasance, by the cost of bad leadership. And what we have here is a reaffirmation about the values and the foundational values of our democracy. And there was no doubt that the court, our Constitutional Court, was duty bound to confront an assault, not just on the court, not just on the rule of law, but on the people of this country. As we sit here today, gathered as supporters in defending our democracy, we see issues escalating around the former president's compound in KwaZulu-Natal, an escalation that's not accidental, an escalation that is on the urging of the former president of our republic. Mr. Zuma, in court papers yesterday, sought to distance himself from the utterances of his own foundation, but we know as freedom-loving South Africans for what that is. It is another attempt to subvert the rule of law and to avoid accountability. The Constitutional Court and Acting Justice Sisi Kampepe, who's proudly and valiantly served this country for more than 40 years, quoted from the founding father of this democracy, Nelson Mandela, who 26 years ago, speaking at the Constitutional Court, reminded those justices, but also the country, about the values of this democracy. There's no doubt our Constitution rests on 3 fundamental pillars: Parliament, elected by us; our government, again elected by us; and our court system, and in particular the Constitutional Court, which is the mechanism to protect our democracy from those who want to undermine it. And there's no doubt that the independence of our democracy is guaranteed and protected in that Constitution. This work is not easy. This work is about transforming our country to respond to the needs of young people, to respond to the needs of the marginalized. Where we find ourselves, we must all remind ourselves that the former president of this republic, Jacob Zuma, defied the processes outlined by the State Capture Commission, a commission, as we were starting this conversation today, he himself signed the proclamation and made specific announcements in support of that commission. The events unfolding and the outcomes of the Constitutional Court decision on Tuesday is not accidental. There was no doubt that he defied the Constitution, and he himself has said that he'd rather go to prison than to comply with the commission, which is here not just to uncover state capture and the rot that took place over 9 years, but to instill accountability that supports and enables South Africans. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate your timekeeping. And I would now move on to Lawson Naidu from who we all know. Lawson Naidu, please come on board.
Thank you, Comrade Murphy. It's a privilege to be here today to represent the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution in this important rally. I think the measure or the test of any democracy is how it treats the weakest members of its society, the protections that it affords to those that are vulnerable. That is the nature of the social accord that is the Constitution that we live by. But it's also measured by how we treat the strongest in our society and hold them to account for the power that they exercise. That in essence is what we mean by the rule of law. And that's why the judgment of the Constitutional Court on Tuesday was, we say, a victory for constitutionalism and a victory for democracy and a victory for the rule of law. I'm just going to focus on the issues emanating from the judgment itself, but others have dealt with other issues. This court's judgment was a forceful statement against the wanton attacks on the courts, the judiciary in general, and on some judges personally. A strategy that Mr. Zuma and his allies have increasingly adopted in response to their mounting legal woes. Much emphasis has been placed on the fact that this was not a unanimous judgment, that there was a dissenting judgment penned by Justice Leonard Theron that was supported by Justice Chris Jafta. But this critique of the dissenting or minority judgment is misplaced. Minority judgments are commonplace in our appeal system and often signal the robustness of debate and the decision-making processes in our highest courts. And in this regard, it's worth noting that in regard to Mr. Zuma's application to the ConCourt yesterday for a rescission of its order is undermined by the fact that it's quite clear that the court, having taken 3 months to consider and deliver its judgment, went through a very robust engagement to canvass all of the arguments that Mr. Zuma now seeks to raise. And that's why the court judgment was as comprehensive as it was and covered all of the issues that he now belatedly seeks to raise. It's important also to say that the difference between the majority judgment and the minority judgment is largely overstated, since both judgments found that Zuma was in contempt of court, and they differed only on the appropriate sanction to be imposed for that contempt. Secondly, much has been made of the court's emphasis on the exceptional nature of the case, seeking to imply that new rules are being made to deal specifically with Zuma. Yet it is important to point out that the exceptionalism in this case lies in the facts and not in the law. Mr. Zuma was found guilty based on his blatant refusal to adhere to an order by the Constitutional Court itself, requiring him to adhere to a lawfully issued summons by the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, which he blatantly refused to do. Zuma's sustained public attacks on the judiciary, which have ranged from personal attacks on individual judges to insinuating that the judiciary as a whole will not treat him fairly, that there's a conspiracy against him, and that it is motivated by such a conspiracy when it makes rulings in cases that involve him. Those challenges are grave, and they seek deliberately to undermine public trust in the courts and in the rule of law. In addition to inciting disobedience of our court orders, such attacks also threaten to weaken our constitutional democracy and encourage lawlessness, a condition that cannot sustain the flourishing of a society that is based on human dignity and human rights. This judgment is a courageous act of judicial independence and underlies the importance of strong institutions in our society and in our democracy. It is true that the courts are the last bulwark against bullying and often anti-democratic threats against our constitutional order. And it is encouraging for all South Africans to see that the Apex Court has taken a decisive stance against unwarranted attacks on its authority, its effectiveness, and its legitimacy as the final arbiters of our Constitution. As a result of what happened this week, we are a stronger constitutional democracy than we were a week ago. Let us protect and defend that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lawson. Absolutely important considerations for us to come forward, punch our chest, and say we defend the Constitution, whatever it will take. Sidimu Mahadi is next on the platform, please. Lawson, can you go off?
Can you just ask Mr. Mufamadi to unmute himself?
Mufamadi, please unmute yourself.
I've just done so.
Thank you.
I'm trying also to show my face.
Oh.
I guess you can do without seeing my face in the circumstances.
Yeah.
So that we don't waste time with me looking for.
Please proceed.
Mr. Program Director and fellow compatriots, it is my singular honor and privilege to have been invited to take part in this rally. The current period is characterized by several morbid symptoms which are putting our democracy under a resilience test. These symptoms include actions and pronouncements which have the effect of poisoning the culture of respect for the rule of law. They also include the growing disdain for lawfulness. And it is this disdain which is becoming a national political flashpoint about which something must be done and done immediately. Such is the nature of the problem that it cannot be effectively addressed without having regard to the wrong tone which is being set by some who are part of our political class. The loss of perspective in those circles is manifested by the tyranny of petulance that we see in the manner in which our public representatives address one another in the hallowed chambers of parliament. Together with some of their legal representatives, they allow their delusions of omnipotence to get the better of them when they appear before our courts. The re-emergence of ethnic and factional vigilantism has very much to do with this. The re-emerging vigilantism heightens feelings of helplessness and insecurity on the part of the population. It is this feeling of helplessness which then gives rise to anarchy and disorder. We who are gathered here and those who are listening and taking part in this rally by way of listening ought to know that we have the collective responsibility to instill a different mindset from the one that is threatening to prevail. Within our respective realms of possibility, we must interdict this creeping mindset of lawlessness. Thankfully, the judiciary is showing the way. It is left now to the executive branch of government to pull up its socks. The police must also not sit on their hands. There has to be a visibility of commitment to enforce the law without fear or favor. The last time I looked, it was the responsibility of the state to look after the security of sitting presidents as well as former presidents. I believe that is still the case. But for some reason, former President Jacob Zuma seems to be choosing to be protected by private entities. It is high time it is put to him that he has to choose to be protected by either one of the two. It can be both state protection and protection by private entities. It is high time government draws the line in the sand. Otherwise, we will continue to perpetuate the perception that some people are more equal than others. I thank you.
Thank you, Ramafumari. This is absolutely important that we depend on the state, on the executive arm to do its job. Because we can't take the law on our own into our own hands. We rely on those institutions that are elected and in fact appointed to do so. So thank you very much. The next slot is for Dade Meg Maharaj to give us a message. It's good if you're a program director, you have names like this because one can only say they need no introduction. Are we letting Mac in? There is no sound. The recorded interview has no sound.
Coming under attack.
Thank you.
I have two contradictory feelings. Firstly, I think the decision of the ConCourt is a watershed moment in the construction of our constitutional democracy. It is a decision that comes at a time when all three arms of our state, because of their own weaknesses perhaps, have been under attack, so that the very fabric of our constitution is slowly coming under attack. The court has taken a very firm and unequivocal step to defend its authority, to uphold the principle that all are equal before the law, and to defend the supremacy of our constitution. So it may well turn out that this decision is a decisive moment in closing the chapter on the abuses of power that have taken place, or in closing the chapter on the entrenchment of corruption in our system, in closing the chapter on the failure of our three arms at different times. But it's also a very sad moment for me. The former president chose to challenge the authority and the credibility of our apex court and to place himself above the Constitution. It is sad because he has played an important role in our liberation struggle and was involved in negotiating our path from apartheid to democracy, negotiations which paved the way for our constitutional democracy. It is sad that he should close the last years of his life by walking back on everything that upholds his humanity, his service to the people, to do so in the interest of defending his personal interests. So it is sad, but I believe that with time, this moment will mark a critical moment in the construction of our democracy.
Thank you for that. And I think it's a very poignant point, especially coming from someone who's worked with the former president and the other presidents before him. So with those words, I would then go on to Me Busisiwe Mavuso to please take the podium, give us a business response to the judgment.
Remo Robert, thank you very much. And thank you very much to all the 600 people that have chosen to join us this afternoon as we draw a line in the sand as a country in terms of the developments of this week. As the business constituency, would like to first acknowledge the brilliant work that has been done thus far by the Defend Our Democracy campaign in standing up to the elements intent on destabilizing the state. And they have now went on to launch an unwarranted and malicious attack on the judiciary by undermining the decision. So what this Defend Our Democracy initiative calls on us is to really for all of us to stand up against those who seek to undermine the rule of law. On the 18th of April 2021, when we launched this initiative, we made a commitment as business alongside all the other social partners. We made a commitment to the rule of law and a declaration that regardless of the outcome on this matter, we will stand by the Constitutional Court decision. That day has finally come, where a clear decision has been made by the Constitutional Court, and it places before all of us a clear choice that we have as a country. A choice of either being spectators and allow the corruption and greed to continue undermining the achievement of our development objectives, or a choice to insist that the rule of the highest court in the land be observed. We have a choice today, fellow South Africans, to say enough is enough to the industrial scale looting that has brought our economy to its knees, and in the process has killed the hopes of many South Africans along with it. Thanks to the state capture project, we are sitting in a country where we are now the most unequal society in the world, where poverty levels are almost touching 60%, where youth unemployment is more than 60%, and where unemployment is 43% in terms of the expanded definition, with more people that are unemployed than those that are employed in all the provinces except Gauteng and the Western Cape. We find ourselves as a country at an interval where our chances of changing our economic trajectory hang in the balance, because our political economy is constraining the growth of our economy. Politics is currently seriously undermining our economic efforts towards our economic recovery, efforts of enabling this ANC-led government to be a capable state, efforts of achieving fiscal sustainability, and efforts of attracting not just foreign direct investment, but local investment. And unfortunately, without the much required investment, the triple challenges that I've alluded to earlier on that we face as a country are actually going to remain elusive. So as business, our choice is very clear today. We refuse to tolerate the intentional destabilization of the state by beneficiaries of corruption and state capture. And it is for this reason that we have decided to unequivocally lend our voice and stand up against this act of defiance by Mr. Jacob Zuma and company. In 2016, at the height of the state capture project, business in this country took a decision and made a commitment. We made a commitment that never again will the business of business be just business. We made a commitment that never again will business go back to its barracks, and never again will we actually stand on the sidelines while our country and our economy is being decimated. As business, our interest here is merely to ensure that we stand up and be counted with the last line of defense in this country, South Africans, today we have an obligation to unequivocally send a strong message that Mr. Zuma is bound by the rules and that he is not beyond the law. And unfortunately, by him challenging this constitutional court decision, he is doing exactly that. Patriots, this is important because South Africa will not be destroyed by those who do wrong, but it will rather be destroyed by those who stand by watching the wrongdoers and do nothing. You see, the rule of law is one of the bedrocks of the South African society, and it is one that we must defend with all that we have. It is our judiciary that continues to set South Africa apart from our African sister countries. It is one of the key reasons why South Africa is still deemed one of the most attractive destinations in the continent. And unfortunately, without it, the negative sentiment will heighten, and that will seriously undermine business confidence. And without business confidence, we cannot have investment. And without investment, the jobs crisis that I've just alluded to that we have in this country cannot be eradicated. So this afternoon, as business, we would like to therefore lend our voice and say that enough is enough, and really lend our support to this initiative and say, let's carry on and defend the rule of the law, and let's carry on and ensure that the highest decision or the decision by the highest court in the land is observed. Program Director, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think thanks for the timekeeping. You've given us a good example who will come after you from the labor front. Thank you, Ndadesole. You can join us now.
Thank you very much, Comrade Murphy, and greetings to the esteemed panel and the collective of the Defense Our Democracy campaign. The SACP fully welcomed the ruling by the Constitutional Court, which reaffirms the supremacy of the rule of law and strengthens our constitutional democracy. And in this regard, we thank the judiciary for playing their part to protect and develop the rule of law and our constitutional democracy. Of course, this order is a clear departure from the impunity that we've seen in the past, and a direct attack against impunity and self-interest and entitlement, and reaffirms the people's call from Kliptown on the 26th of June, 1955, when they said in the Freedom Charter and adopted the Freedom Charter and said, all shall be equal before the law. It is important as well to state that the higher the office you occupy, the higher the responsibility, and the higher the morality, as well as the integrity and the humility that is expected from those who occupy such offices. This, the people can expect no less, nor our revolution expect less either. And we must also highlight that it is no heroism to defy the rule of law in a constitutional democracy. The rule of law and our constitutions are the cornerstone of our democracy, and therefore must be obeyed and equally enforced. It is in this regard that we reject, with the contempt that it deserves, an escalation of mobilization against the rule of law. And we also want to say, Umkhonto wesizwe combatants, or former Umkhonto wesizwe combatants, should not be used in this regard, because MK was trained in the revolutionary traditions to be on the side of the people, to respect and protect the people and their institutions, and to respect political authority. And in this case, having created a constitutional dispensation, they are bound, duty-bound, to protect the institutions of our democracy that many heroic combatants of MK died in battle fighting for. Therefore, any destabilization of the country in the name of former MK combatants is totally rejected with the contempt that it deserves. It is not revolutionary at all. On the contrary, this is counter-revolutionary and should not be supported by anybody. MK should not allow itself and its history of heroic struggle to be tarnished by these current actions. And we also want to say, as the SACP, we reject and firmly condemn the reckless statement by Karl Niehaus on possible violence in KZN. And we characterize this as extremely irresponsible and unacceptable. And we distance ourselves from it, and the MK that we are party to establishing jointly with our ally, the ANC. And therefore, we call on the collective leadership of our movement to speak out and condemn any possibility for the intention to use our former combatants to breed violence in our country. There's no need for violence and war. There's a need in this particular period to deepen the unity of the people behind the constitution and to develop our constitution and our democracy and to deepen the rule of law and to defend the rule of law. We also call on the ANC to speedily address internal problems that are now threatening its heroic legacy of revolutionary struggle at the helm of our liberation movement. And we are saying that these problems are now mopping up into a crisis. So the sooner the ANC resolve these matters, the better as well for the rest of us as a country. But we appreciate the Defense Our Democracy campaign and all organizations and individuals across our country that are firm behind the Constitution and our democracy and are willing to participate in the development of our Constitution and democracy into a people's constitution, people's democracy, rooted firmly amongst the people so that the people themselves on a daily basis, they can continue to defend it. In this regard, we thank the Defense of Our Democracy campaign and support its continued work and say unequivocally, long live our democratic constitution and long live the rule of law. Thank you very much, Comrade Murphy and the team.
Solly, thank you so much. You know, when you mentioned the reckless statements by one person called Karl Niehaus, in fact, it is opposite that it reminds us of the fact that the project of Stratcom of the 1980s was never fully dismantled. And some of the Asian provocateurs are still finding their way amongst our people and stirring up things to land us back to where we are when Vilakazi Street in Katlehong was turned into a bloodbath, getting black people to fight against each other. This is where this is leading to, unless all of those who love democracy will stand up and say, no more, no further. Thank you very much. I'm going to then ask the next speaker, who needs no introduction. Those of us who follow media will remember and will know him still as someone who was involved and still is involved with Freya Weekblad, that Max Dupree.
Thank you, Murphy. Just in case anybody looking at my face now is confused, let me make it very clear. I am not Karl Niehaus. It's just that we are from the same genetic pool and we all tend to look alike, but only from the outside. The assault on our criminal justice system, our institutions and our constitution over recent years has undermined our national sense of self-respect, pride, and dignity. We are experiencing a moment right now where we can make a decisive break with that trend. So in this time of lies and fake news and propaganda and the abuse of social media, the mainstream media has a very special role to play in our national life. We have to reflect the opinions of all sides, of all the divides, but we have to be very clear and very firm that we serve the truth first. We should be fair and balanced, but our first priority should be to put the facts on record and expose the lies. We should be fact-checking as we go along and report on events. At this time of heightened tension, honest and responsible journalism should be our main focus, rather than increasing the number of our readers or viewers. We as journalists should resist the temptation to give prominence and publicity to political actors and others simply because they shout the loudest or make the most sensational claims or threats. The South African media will be tested in the days and weeks ahead. We as journalists will be judged harshly by history if we succumb to the temptation to be a part of the hysteria and lawlessness instead of being a sober, credible source of facts and truth. An informed public opinion is an essential ingredient of democracy, and society relies on us as journalists for that information, for context and analysis. Neutrality and objectivity can never mean simply reporting and repeating lies and fake news. Society has given us as media people considerable power. We should use it carefully and responsibly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dupree. That was the word from the journalistic world to say facts are important. We must use facts and the truth to fight against, in fact, all of those who go out to distort the fact, to distort the truth in order to, in fact, mislead people in the wrong direction. Now, coming from academia, we have Professor Mabizela, who would now join us as well to give a perspective on the judgment from that side of the equation.
Thank you very much, Program Director, compatriots, comrades and friends. This is a watershed moment for our country. This is a defining moment in the history of our young democracy. The seminal judgment handed down by our Constitutional Court on Tuesday marks an inflection point in our constitutional project. It was a stunning victory for the rule of law and a vindication of the supremacy of our Constitution. Once again, the justices of our Constitutional Court have demonstrated that our highest court in the land is our last bastion of hope and a fearless guardian of our Constitution. So we call on Mr. Zuma to abide by the judgment of the Constitutional Court. We also urge organizations, political and civil formations, and all South Africans to respect the judgment of the highest court of our land. We wish to make a special call on those of us in academia to take this as a teachable moment, a moment to reinforce the primacy of the rule of law and the supremacy of our Constitution. We also call on those of us who get to be invited by the media to provide commentary on the weighty matters of our nation, to resist the temptation to clothe with a semblance of legitimacy, credibility, or respectability, falsehoods, misinformation, and disinformation intended to confuse our society. We do ourselves no favors, nor do we do the academy any justice if we defend the indefensible. Now, Mr. Zuma has an unprecedented opportunity to show leadership and that he cares about this country and its people. First, he must call on all those who are gathered outside his homestead in Nkandla to disperse as they are exposing themselves to the serious risk of contracting the coronavirus. This will show that he cares about the health, safety, and well-being of the people of this country. Is this too much to ask for? Certainly not. Second, he must distance himself from those who are beating drums of war, peddling false, misleading, and baseless claims in order to incite lawlessness, violence, and anarchy. Is this an unreasonable expectation of a leader? I don't believe so. Third, when the day comes, as it will, he must voluntarily and freely surrender himself to the law enforcement agencies of our country in obedience to the Constitution to which he has sworn allegiance many times. Is this too much to expect of a leader? I don't think so. Comrades and friends, on this momentous occasion, let us take it as our individual and collective responsibility to defend, advance, and deepen our constitution and our democracy wherever we are. Let us do it for the sake of our country. Let us do it as a fitting tribute to those who gave their all so we could live in a democracy. Let us do it for future generations. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor Siabonga. Obedience to our constitution is non-negotiable. If you're unhappy with it, there is a legal and political process that you must embark upon to effect the changes that you want. To the extent that the constitution is there, no person in the Republic has the right to actually play lotto with our constitution. So I'm going to ask Ila Gandhi to step forward to give us a civil society response to this issue. And I don't need to emphasize why civil society is important. We know that in governance, government is as strong as the civil society over which it governs. And therefore, that arm of our people is as important as some of the formal arms that government has, that to reach the people in every corner of our land. For that, we raise our head to our civil society colleagues. Ila Gandhi, please speak to us.
Thank you, Program Director and fellow citizens. I dedicate this speech to the millions of our people who sacrifice their all so that all South Africans can enjoy a non-racial, democratic, just, and equitable order in this country. We remember and salute the mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, wives, husbands, and daughters and sons of the many freedom fighters, both men and women, who lost their lives for the establishment of our democracy and for the replacement of an unjust, oppressive apartheid system. Today, as we gather here to defend that democracy that was built on such great sacrifices, we once again ask our fellow South Africans, as we did in 1955, when the Freedom Charter was drawn up, what is it that you would like to see in our country? Those of us working on the ground hear the plea from the many poverty-stricken fellow human beings for peace from the ongoing violent order in our country, sustainable livelihoods, and a just and democratic order based on the principles of the Freedom Charter. A charter that was drawn up by the people and for the people, not for one or two individuals, but for all the people of our country, black and white. As we struggle to defend our hard-earned democracy in our country, we need to remember the fundamental principles on which our struggle was built. Democracy will naturally be threatened if money, power, and positions become the dominant narrative in place of the highest principles enshrined in our Constitution, in our scriptures, and in our Freedom Charter. The crafters of these documents recognize our interconnectedness, our interdependency, and our basic human rights and responsibilities. While we recognize that as human beings, we are all fallible, we also recognize that we all carry an inherent responsibility as well. That responsibility is to maintain law and order. So today we call on all those who have who may have forgotten the pledges we made as freedom fighters and as leaders of our community to bow to the laws of this country and accept the consequences with dignity and humility, which have been our guiding principles. Let us show our mettle by respecting and obeying the supreme law of this country, our Constitution. Laws are made, courts are set up, correctional services are organized, and police services are provided so that a democratic order can be seen in our country. To flout these institutions of justice is a travesty. We therefore now call on all those who held leadership positions of one kind or another to obey the rule of law, to remember that one's stature and dignity can only be enhanced if we have the mettle to accept the rule of law and to uphold a just order in which there are no exceptions to the rule and all are equal before the law. Of course, it is not easy, but true grit can only be revealed when we are able to supersede the fear of paying the price for justice to prevail. We say to all those who may have erred over the years that it is time now to accept the rule of law and pay the price with dignity. At the end, we earn the respect of our community simply by obeying the rules and regulations of justice. We must also commend the hundreds of thousands of active citizens around the country who came out in support of the campaigns against corruption. We owe gratitude to all the people's organizations, and I'll just cite a few, the Katrada and Mandela Foundations, the Active Citizens Movement, the Gandhi Development Trust, and many, many other community organizations who have rallied to the call to uphold our democratic values. At the same time, we call on those who feel that they have to protect the rights of their errant leaders to do so in dignity and peacefully, rather than flouting not only the laws of the country, but also endangering themselves and others by flouting the COVID-19 protocols. We say to them, set an example of dignity and discipline rather than chaos, incitement, and anarchy, an order into which our country can easily descend unless we help our government in upholding law and order. Mobilization of people, as in this rally, is important to draw attention to the need for a democratic order to prevail. We cannot allow the rule of anarchy, or as we see in many other countries, rule of private militia to prevail in our country. The importance of adherence to our Constitution and the maintenance of the integrity of our democracy are crucial at this stage when we see our democracy crumbling under the weight of rampant corruption and violence. We call on all the former leaders to once again take up the challenge to show their true grit by restraining their followers and through their own strength of character, humility, and acceptance of the rule of law, gain self-respect. The Bible states, "What shall it avail a man if he gains the whole world and lose his soul?" Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will have, I'm going to try and get some savings of time with the next speaker so that we can put in a little bit of 2 to 3 minutes at the end for a response to the breaking news that we've had about the decision of the ConCourt regarding Mr. Zuma's request. But I'll ask then Sheikh Ihsan Talib to take the podium, please.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and thank you to everybody who are tuned into this important platform. And greetings from the Muslim Judicial Council and faith communities. The South African Constitution is the single most fundamental institution that protects South Africa as a nation from ever witnessing the most egregious human rights violations under imperialist colonialism and apartheid being repeated in modern history. 25 years into democracy, we have seen great strides being made in many sectors, including government, the private sector and the NGO sector. However, the promise of a better life for all who live in our country has all but been reduced to an aborted exercise, as the vast majority of our citizens continue living in desolate conditions of abject poverty, spiraling unemployment, violent crime, lack of decent housing and access to clean running water. It is common cause that these challenging conditions have been spawned and entrenched by the widespread corruption that have taken the root both in the public and private sectors, but especially in the executive arm of democracy. Corruption can only happen with the presence of corruptors and corruptees. As for the third arm of democratic government, the judiciary, South Africans have correctly held onto the belief that we are indeed in our right to remain optimistic and filled with anticipation of the fulfillment of the constitutional values in the Bill of Rights for every citizen of our country. However, the current attack on the South African Constitution in the context of the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, there can be no debate, represent an unprecedented assault on the rule of law. The natural consequences undermining whereof can only lead to a deepening of corruption on the part of public servants who increasingly flout the principle of ethical accountability with impunity. The Constitutional Court ruling is based on the consensus of the ConCourt judges of the guilty verdict of contempt of court. As faith communities, therefore, we record our support for the Constitutional Court ruling in order to protect the judiciary, parliament, and the executive, whose responsibility it is to implement the ruling of the Constitutional Court. I thank you and good day.
Thank you, Sheikh. Much appreciated. And we have a recorded message from Archbishop Thabo Makgoba. Is the message coming?
Yep, thanks
That.
for reflecting with you as the non-governmental organization that really want to ensure that democracy is upheld and respected in South Africa. Thank you to the Kathrada Foundation also for the invitation on behalf of this important movement in our country. I had prayed that we would not get to the point at which Mr. Zuma was jailed for contempt. As you all know, my prayer has always been, how do we serve the poorest of the poor in our democratic dispensation? And one of the ways is to root out corruption. And the Zondo Commission touches the iceberg of the amount of monies that were Dear friends, thanks for the opportunity for reflecting with you as the non-governmental organization that really want to ensure that democracy is upheld and respected in South Africa. Thank you to the Kathrada Foundation also for the invitation on behalf of this important movement in our country. I had prayed that we would not get to the point at which Mr. Zuma was jailed for contempt. As you all know, my prayer has always been, how do we serve the poorest of the poor in our democratic dispensation? And one of the ways is to root out corruption. And the Zondo Commission touches the iceberg of the amount of monies that were stolen from the poorest of the poor. And so the judgment on the contempt of court is welcome. It is a credit to our democracy, a credit that the judiciary and the institutions of accountability remain strong in the face of pressure. They remain our source of hope, the reassurance that all that we have struggled for has not been lost in the last period, years which the locusts have devoured. We remain a resilient democracy. So the courts have affirmed critical values. And when Judge Sisi read the outcome, she was at pains to say, we are a moral and an ethical country. We're not a country where anybody does as they wish because of their situation, that the courts will rule without fear nor favor. And that for me represents the best of who we are as South Africans, that the poor of the poorest will not be trampled down by those who have power and access. So today, as you hold this virtual rally, I encourage you not to focus necessarily on the orange overall, but to pledge to continue to strengthen and respect the institutions that ensures that we are all equal before the law. To continue to recommit to institutions that wants to get the best of our humanity and to strengthen us in our social convictions as democrats and artisans of justice. I urge you to really ensure that our children, and I say all South Africans, know the Constitution. They know its tenets, they know its practices. And so good luck and God's strength on this virtual rally as you reflect and recommit to a democratic South Africa. Please join me in wishing Mama Leah and Desmond Tutu, Arch Emeritus, their 66th wedding anniversary. They embody also the best of what we can do and be as South Africans. I thank you. Please remember the rule of law, its principles, and the organs of society like yourselves that give expression to the rule of law as you continue in this virtual rally. God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. We are so grateful for those words, and we will really take them on board as we think of the road ahead, which is not going to be easy, but it's a road that must be taken anyway. So here we are. And the next speaker will be Jane Naidu, who will engage us on democracy's needs, the need defending, that democracy needs defending and change. Thank you very much, Jane Naidu.
Thank you, Comrade Murphy Morobi. Fellow countrymen and women, comrades, I stand with you at this present moment as our country stands at another crossroads. We've been here before. Let us find our courage at an individual and collective level. Many generations have fought for the freedoms that we enjoy today and that are enshrined in our Constitution. These are not just words on a piece of paper. They are the solemn covenant on which we went to our people and signed a political contract with them. 1994 was the beginning of a new chapter in writing our dreams into reality. We had a social consensus then that we would build a people-centered democracy based on a program of action aimed at addressing the legacy of apartheid and eradicating poverty and inequality. That our liberation struggle would never end up where history has shown others have been, eating the children of our revolution, where liberation heroes believe they did not struggle to be poor. We were meant to be different. We had learned the lessons of history. We had written them into a constitution so that our people and country could be protected from any abuse of power. And that was vested in the apex constitutional court, on which the most eminent South Africans were appointed to represent our people. On our journey to deepen democracy and to deliver the better life we promised our people, we have made some progress, but we've also made some very big mistakes. The reality that liberation and those appointed to lead us have disappointed us bitterly. The Zondo Commission of Inquiry into State Capture has shown a litany of disgraceful dereliction of public duty and commitment to good governance and ethical leadership. We must now know that any acts of impunity will not be tolerated anymore. The Constitutional Court has fired a shot against the bows of those who seek to destabilize our country and undermine the rule of law. My earnest wish is that those that have been implicated in state capture, not only at the Zondo Commission, but in various levels of inquiry and investigation by fearless members of the independent media and civil society, have brought us to this point, that our demand today is unanimous. No one is above the law. We will not yield to threats. Our people have spoken and we have had enough. We want justice. And those who have had their hands in our public treasuries must now face the might of the law. Our freedom was not won by leaders. Our youth are angry, legitimately, because they've been betrayed. Our people are poor and hungry in a country on which we walk on golden diamonds. But our people have the right to demand the better life we promised them. No one is above the law. And today we have the right to demand leaders who are there to serve us, not those that think they have some divine right to rule over us. The time has come. Sekunjalo Kanako. Let the people govern and leaders understand. Whether you're a CEO of a company, you're a leader of a trade union, or you're a premier minister, or even a president, you break the law, you break your oath of office, and you will face the full might of the law. I thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Jay. Thank you very much. You can't miss the passion. That's the passion that is missing, that we want to bring back into the front line of engaging with the protection of what we fought so much for to bring about in this country. And this movement is what, in fact, is required for us to do, to bring everyone on board so that we can make advances in ensuring that we build, in fact, the moat around our constitution so that it can serve us, it can serve future generations. I have Mondli Kungubele on the line, who will then come and speak to us from his organization's perspective. Thank you, Mondli.
Thank you, Comrade Murphy. I must express my gratitude for this rare moment, finding myself amongst the men and women of repute in our country.
And it's 5 minutes. I know you're a politician from Parliament. It's 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
To express themselves to the state of our country. Just before I say a few words on what I would have understood to be the ANC's attitude to this matter, I find instruction from what Judge Gabinde said as he was actually contributing to the core of Section 165, when he said, the rule of law as a foundational value of our Constitution requires that the dignity and the authority of the courts should be upheld, because he argues that the capacity of the court to carry their function depends on that dignity and the authority. It is unfortunate that we're meeting today talking about the challenge to the rule of law, the subject being one of the heroes of our struggle, Comrade JZ. The ANC had looked at this matter at some stage in 2017 under the theme, Remember Tambo, Unity and Renewal, Radical Socio-Economic Transformation. This was a response to the state of the characterization of our organization, where amongst ourselves, we were able to find that others had gone to looting, disrespect for the law, and many other iniquities that we found a number of us amongst ourselves involved in. It is against that background that a number of resolutions were adopted, but the key to that one was the resolution on corruption, credibility, and so on. Contained in that resolution is a commitment to re-educate our members with regard to the values and ethics of the movement based on the demand our people place on us, including the Constitution and the law, as the guardians of the state, of the resources of the state. Since August last year, our organization has been confronted with this. It is against this background that renewal had to find a footing where we are dealing with what we call self-cleansing. On the rule of the law, a series of statements have been made by our organization with regard to its centrality, because it was informed by the fact that our forebears fought for a democratic order founded on the predictable laws, without which consistency, coherency would not be secured, that ensures predictability of environment, where investors, domestic and international, where young people can plan their future in this country. On the ConCourt, because the ANC had directed through its conference its members to respect the centrality of the law, simply what we see in that verdict is the expression of that centrality of the law. It's not the number of majority versus minority. It is the outcome that has been properly processed in line with the Constitution, which is the verdict of the court, whose dignity and authority should be protected. And to the ANC, because this is an expression of the law, it is expected that all the members of the African National Congress should respect it as such. Again, having said that, it is against this background that, because this verdict is the expression of the rule of the law, and ANC having instructed its members to respect that rule of the law, it is unacceptable and cannot be condoned, and it must be condemned when anyone masquerade in the uniform of the African National Congress to defy a court decision, which is an expression of the law. My little message to our former president, who I have a lot of respect for, is that what he does on the basis of this decision, especially to the people who are marching to Nkandla today and who are there, the kind of education and leadership he provides to them will either seal his heroic contribution to the struggle or blot it. he has a choice to make. At the end, I want to say, the court had to make a choice between adjudicating within the Constitution against individuals, irrespective of their titles, regardless of the implications, or sentence our legal system to the eternal grave of illegitimacy. And we are happy that the court chose the former, the centrality of the law, without which the dreams for which our forebears died and lived will never be realized. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Mondley. Your input is much appreciated. Now, we've been following these presentations, and the real world out there is also moving on, in that we have picked up already, as we are talking about the decision of the court to hear Tate Zuma. And a number of you are posting wanting to know if there can be a perspective on that outcome that can be shared before we come to the end with Tate Mpumlwana giving us the closing remarks. I'm advised that Advocate Thuli Madonsela is available to give us a comment on this latest development on this saga, which, notwithstanding whatever the approach to the court is, it doesn't say to me that the sentence is to be put aside. I think that we'll get those who know the workings of this sector to share with us. Mema Donsela, available to give us your perspective.
Thank you again, dear colleague, and thank you for this privilege. My take on what has just happened shows two things. One is President Zuma is now prepared to play by the rules that apply to all of us. But secondly, that the Constitutional Court's decision to choose to use its hard power as opposed to soft power to get President Zuma to play by the rules was justified. If any of us had any doubt about the choice of pathways to enforce the Constitution by the Constitutional Court, what has just happened shows that when the Constitutional Court drew a line in the sand that there'd be no impunity, that we're not on an animal farm, nobody is above the law, President Zuma got the message and he is now trying to play by the rules. But it also says to us what the Constitutional Court did, what this whole journey was all about. It was about accountability. It was never about sending President Zuma or anybody to jail. It was about getting President Zuma to account for what happened under his presidency at the commission that he himself established. And what the Constitutional Court did then, it punished him for placing himself above the law and above the Constitution by defying the Constitutional Court and treating it with unimaginable contempt. What happens going forward, I agree with you, program moderator, that the application to the Constitutional Court does not ask for a stay of the going to jail. And therefore, President Zuma's lawyers better approach the Constitutional Court itself to stay the going to jail if they want that to be stayed. You will recall that in this very application, President Zuma talks about having been misadvised about staying the consequences of the December decision of the Constitutional Court. And I think he should be better advised this time to approach the Constitutional Court to stay its own decision. But for me, again, this is a victory for constitutional democracy. And I think both the ConCourt and President Zuma should be applauded for playing by the rules. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. For those who get confused, when what Professor Madonsela was really referring to really was former president or ex-president Zuma, because our president right now is President Cyril Ramaphosa. Just a little correction. But anyway, I think we understand where things are at now, but where we are with our program, we're at the point where I'm going to be asking Bishop Umalusi Mpumlwana to then take the podium and then give us our closing remarks so that we can then get out there and go do what we need to do to make sure that this constitution of ours remains at the top of the pedestal of our instruments for deepening our democracy. Babu Mfundisi, can you please speak to us?
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. The heads of the member churches of the South African Council of Churches made a call on February 25 for all South Africans to stand up against destabilization. The church leaders said they yearned to hear from South Africans a loud no to destabilization. The initiative to defend our democracy is a significant expression of what the church leaders were calling for, and we're grateful. Thank you for your resilience in this regard. As we come to the end of this event, allow me please to share a few reflections in conclusion. This week is a sad week in South Africa. It is a sad week whose events we feared back in November 2020 when the leaders of the SABC made efforts to meet with Mr. Jacob Zuma, and that effort did not succeed. It is a week whose events we dreaded with greater intensity in February when Mr. Zuma acted on his view that he could not appear before Justice Raymond Zondo. At that time, Mr. Zuma's Zondo's president had a rising dimension. He said, if this stance of mine, I suppose, is considered a violation of their law, then let their law take its course. Now, at that time, we said, as South African churches, we are very concerned about the expression their law in Mr. Zuma's statement. This is the immediate past president of the Republic, the executive authority whose signature has for almost a decade confirmed all our law in the Republic. It is by this law, the highest of which is the Constitution, that he remains the honored special citizen and no ordinary South African. When he refers to South African law as their law, those with whom he is at odds, he is, in one phrase, polarizing the country into an us and them, a destabilizing approach that can easily lead to polarization and conflict in South African communities. We have now arrived at that point of polarization on the law and its institutions as a bone of contention. It is a sad week and a sad day that requires every South African to cool down and be measured in what we say. Those who celebrate the judgment of the ConCourt should not be triumphalist. It is a sad victory if reactions to it have the potential to cost lives of people. Likewise, those who reject the binding authority of the ConCourt judgment should not whip up public emotions and seek the violent destabilization of the country. The leaders who make such calls are not likely to be the casualties of the violence, nor will it be their own children. Anyone with a just cause concerning the unjust application of the law must do so within the law and not to spite the law and thereby destabilize society. Mr. Zuma, like all other South Africans, has the right to make his own decisions about how he feels and how he deals with what he perceives as injustice. But unlike Madlamini, who's my mother, Mr. Zuma is no ordinary citizen. As a former head of state of the Republic of South Africa, he is a constitutional being. His life is managed and served by the state in that constitutional capacity. It is in that context that we express support for Mr. Zuma's last-ditch effort to appeal to the Constitutional Court, whatever the outcome thereof. That judicial approach should be pursued with the readiness to accept whatever the outcome thereof, and that we should remove from the judicial processes the idea that courts are designed to do something to some persons. Mr. Zuma is not yet being addressed for what flows from the Zondo Commission, where indeed nobody knows if he will have to face any charges at all. This is a dispute about whether he will refute or confirm what has been alleged by other witnesses. We regret that he has not taken up that opportunity given his seniority as a citizen. However, if the justice system fails to bring to the courts those who have been implicated in the Zondo Commission, the impression will gain credence that some people are being fingered discriminately. There is a public misunderstanding that seeks to personalize and politicize the judgment of the Constitutional Court. If South Africans were to be persuaded that the courts are instruments for personal and political purposes, we would be on a fast lane to the demise of our constitutional democracy. The fact that there are people who misunderstand the place of the Constitutional Court at the head of our judicial system is a commentary on how poorly this country has invested in the full appreciation of our Constitution and its institutions. As a result of this lack of appreciation and the responsibilities that each of us have, many people, instead of using the national contractual document, the Constitution, to interpret national realities, they use many divisive measures. They use ethnic or racial identity. They use political affiliation and regionalism. They use the privilege of class and personal history. My call to each of the organizations that are in this rally today is that we all go and make our determinations of how we are to contribute within our spheres of influence to understanding the South African constitutional order. Only when we do that, and when the state makes a matter of critical importance, the understanding of the Constitution by all who live in this country, young and old, only then shall we have a society that responds to these challenging words of Nelson Mandela, who said, "Public awareness and participation in maintaining efficiency in government within the context of human rights are vital to making a reality of democracy." Secondly, we wonder what accountability Mr. Zuma's lawyers have for the manner that they have advised him. And some of the positions they seem ready to defend and promote before the courts. Is there any institutional accountability for this kind of thing? Thirdly, it is a truth that we cannot deny that the governing party, the African National Congress, has direct responsibility for the state in which we are. The SABC churches have said before, and I repeat it here, that disagreements within the ANC must not be managed at the expense of the country and its 16 million citizens. We appreciate that the ANC has suspended its business this weekend to address the restiveness over the ConCourt judgment in KwaZulu-Natal that appears set to destabilize the country and foment violence and lawlessness. The churches offer prayers that the senior leaders that are engaging with Mr. Zuma may yield a positive result. Finally, as churches, this is true of all our faiths. We have a pastoral responsibility to hold up the whole nation. And because of our biblical commitment to social justice, we are constrained to stand firm for the only means to hold the country together, the constitutional order, through which there is a chance for the poorest of our people to access the warmth from the rays of the sun that God has given to South Africa. As Prophet Amos said, "Let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream." And through this, the poorest of our people will have a place under the sun. Thank you. Let us all go and do what we can do within our spheres of influence, because all of us have a role to play. Thank you for this time.
Bishop Mpumlwana, we thank you very much for your contribution. And just to say, I think that we are now at a point where all we can do, having exposed us to the various insights, is to actually say that we ask organizations and individuals to actively participate in the campaign. And in so doing, you'll be looking at ways in which you can do so. You can encourage the blowing of the whistle against corruption. You can encourage the reporting of corruption. You can raise your voice wherever you are and participate in activation to support the Orange campaign on Fridays. But most importantly, we have to understand that feel that we represent those honest, freedom-loving South Africans who do not have the opportunity to stand at the top of platforms and shout opprobrium at the other person who they disagree with. People who go about honestly going about their daily work, hoping that those who have responsibility for managing government and the state are doing so in their interest and to serve them as they fight the battle against poverty and unemployment. And with those words, I really thank everyone who participated with us, and we look forward to seeing you on the various campaigns as they unfold. And God bless you, and God bless South Africa. Amandla. And that brings us to the end of our program. And I think it's important for me to thank the organizers and those who have been supporting in the background, especially from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, and our speakers who've given their time to think through and write their inputs, which, as you know, has been recorded and it's been going live on Facebook. So South Africa, there is no time to lie back and let others to decide our future for us. The future is in our hands. Thank you very much.